The time is now 6 p.m. Our regular City Council meeting for April 14, 2020 is now in session. First on the agenda is Councilmember Scott will lead us with the opening prayer and the pledges of allegiance to the flags of the United States and the state of Texas. Please rise.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for our many, many wonderful blessings. Thank you for the gift of faith. Thank you for the privilege of living in a land where we are free to worship you. Thank you for our family and our dear friends and our neighbors, and for the gift of living in shirts. Thank you especially for our first responders who sacrifice so much for us and who stand in the way of harm for us each and every day. Our wonderful police officers, firefighters, and our medical personnel. We lift them up and we ask a special blessing on them and their families. Bless our leaders and thank you for their leadership and their guidance. Please give them the ability to govern responsibly at this time more than ever. Please be with our president, our governor, and our local leaders. We ask that you guide the mayor and city council to make the choices that reflect your love and wisdom, and we ask that you give us the gift of the spirit of power and love and not fear. Let us make wise choices. Heavenly Father, thank you for shirts that we get to live in such a wonderful city. Thank you for the city employees and bless them and their families and let them know we appreciate their fine job that they're doing for us. We pray for our nation during these troubling times. Father, please be with the people who have lost their jobs and their livelihoods and help provide for their families during their hour of need. And finally, we ask that you give us your spirit and let us emulate love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. In Jesus' name and for his sake, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to the Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. We'll continue with the city events and announcements. Announcements of upcoming city events. There is none? Okay. Announcements and recognitions by our city manager, Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have one tonight. I wanted to recognize that it's officially National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week. And so normally we have a proclamation, but given the situation, we're not going to do that tonight. But we do want to recognize our fine dispatch operators and all the telecommunicators in our dispatch office for the great work they do. So just wanted to make that announcement. Thank you.
Thank you. Next announcements, recognitions by the mayor. I just have one announcement. As a reminder, students who are participating in the Hal Baldwin Scholarship are required to sign in on the sheet located in the back. Students watching our meeting online can still receive credit by contacting Sarah Gonzalez at 210-619-1015. Again, that number is 210-619-1015. Well, next on the agenda is the hearing of residents. This time is set aside for any person who wishes to address the City Council. Each person is limited to 3 minutes, and we ask before addressing the Council, for the record, please state your name and address. I see that no one signed up. Ms. Dennis, is there anyone that submitted the hearing residents in writing? Thank you. We'll proceed then with the consent agenda items. Item number 1, the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting, April 7, 2020. Item number 2, ordinance number 20H06, an ordinance by the City Council, an ordinance by the City of Schertz, Texas, amending Chapter 14, Animal Control of the Code of Ordinance, providing for mandatory microchipping regulations for dogs and cats, therefore removing the requirement for annual city license for dogs and cats, providing a conflict clause, providing for servability, providing for publication, and providing an effective date. This is also our final reading. Item number 3, ordinance number 20D-10, an ordinance by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, approving for the Code of Ordinance of the City of Schertz, Texas, be amended by revising Section 86-115, maximum limits generally on specific streets, and providing an effective date. This is also our final reading. And item number 4, ordinance number 20T-11, an ordinance by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing an adjustment to the fiscal year 2019-2020 budget to transfer funds for the purchase of software parts and labors for 14 existing flashing school zone lights and the purchase of 3 additional lights, repealing all ordinances in conflict with this ordinance and providing an effective date. This is also our final reading. Council, is there any of these items that need to be removed for separate action? No?
Mayor, on the next page, we have items 5 and 6.
Those are discussion items.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mayor?
Yes, Ms. Scott?
I would like to discuss ordinance 20H06,
Okay, that's number
number
2.
2.
Okay. Council, any others? No. Okay. Okay, is there a motion to approve agenda items 1, 3, and 4?
So moved. Second.
Okay. That was by, was that Councilman Brown?
Davis.
Davis, I'm sorry. And second by Councilmember Larson. Okay. Motion's been made by Councilmember Davis, second by Councilmember Larson. Council, any other comments? If none, let's call for the vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we have 7 ayes, no objection, motion passes. All right, we'll move on to discussion items and action items. We'll go back to item number 2. Okay, item number 2 is ordinance number 20H06, an ordinance by the City of Schertz, Texas, amending Chapter 14, Animal Control of the Code of Ordinance, providing for mandatory microchipping regulations for dogs and cats, therefore removing the requirement for the annual city license for dogs and cats, providing conflict clause, providing for servability, providing for publication, and providing an effective date. Chief Bain, you have the floor.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you.
Ms. Scott?
Thank you. Last week, I kind of took it on face value when you said that, I think your director or you, I can't remember, please refresh my memory, but y'all had done research looking into cancer-related deaths from animals who had been microchipped. Did you do that research yourself?
That came from our veterinarian who takes
Okay.
care of all our animals.
All righty. Since that time, I have researched it extensively. I had just, I hadn't quite done my homework at that point. I have done it since that time, and I found multiple studies, the most famous one being from Elcock, tumors and long-term rat studies associated with microchip animal identification devices, experimental and toxology pathology. The report surfaced that the glass-encapsulated RFID, the radio frequency identification, transponders, microchips, cause malignant, fast-growing, and lethal cancers in up to 1 to 10% of cases in rats and mice. That's just one. There have been quite a few others. I realize that 1% doesn't seem statistically significant, but if that's your dog or cat, that could be problematic. I felt like it's my conscience to be an advocate for the animals. I think technology is a wonderful master. No, so I said that backwards on my Freudian slip showing. I think it's a wonderful servant and a horrible master. And I don't like doing stuff just because you can. I understand efficiencies. I mean, I get all that, and I read the documentation pretty carefully. I saw last week the clause where you could get like your dog or cat tattooed from the vet. So it seems like there's a little out if somebody really. Am I remembering it correctly? Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
If the veterinarian feels that there's a concern with your animal, that is an option.
Right. And I know that I believe in that. I'm a big advocate for that. I know that whenever I had children, their little nephew, when he got the DBT shot, the pertussis shot, he had a horribly adverse reaction to it, and he was walking into doors for several days. And I talked to my doctor about it, and they removed that part from his inoculation series from that one, since it was genetic and it was, or whatever, just in case. Like I said, if that's yours, it's quite a different thing. But anyway, I do think that this warrants further examination, and I felt kind of stricken last week. Like, how could I have voted for that? I think there should be a personal freedom on whether or not, instead of the state dictating that we have to do this. I know a lot of countries are moving toward this. I think the UK 100% is on board with it now, and I know governments are moving in this direction. But I still, I'm hesitant to go there, Mayor Gutierrez.
Okay. Council, any other comments? None?
One more before we
Okay.
close. There was also an internet survey that I just took today, and it was, is microchipping safe for dogs? This is all consumer-based, not vet-based. But 64% of the consumers said yes, and 36% said no. And I think that's a significant number. And I do want to represent our constituents. So, okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, Councilmember Scott. Council? Yes, Councilmember Hayward?
Chief Bain, you were saying, I know a couple weeks back, that we're supposed to register animals, and there were a couple of council members who hadn't had their animals registered for $5. Or whatever the case cost was. And how many was those? It was like 36 out of the 40,000 people in the city of Schertz.
Yes, ma'am.
So with that, knowing that that's a requirement and people don't do it, I'm not sure, even with this, everyone's going to do it. Unless their dog gets lost, then once they're found, they'll probably do it. So I don't think people are going to probably run out and do it, since they're not registering the dogs with the city. Would that be
Well, I
a
think
good assumption?
The what we have now is we require people to come back every year. Where under this program, it's a one-time deal. So, and you're going to find too that a lot of the vendors and all of your shelters where these animals are coming out of are microchipping. And when you look at the grand scheme of things, how many thousands of animals in this region go into a shelter and don't make it out because they can't locate an owner? We're saving a lot more lives than we are hurting.
Oh, when I had a dog, she was microchipped. And then when I had a dog, she was microchipped. It didn't work for us in Italy, but in the States it did when she got out. So,
Yes.
thank you.
And we have animals, for example, yesterday we had an animal enter the shelter. In 20 minutes we knew who the owner was. And in 30 minutes the dog was back home. And if we didn't have that, we wouldn't know where to start. We would just hope that they would come to our Facebook page or our website and look for that dog, but a lot of people still don't do that.
So then with this said, even though it says mandatory, people still have the option, correct?
If they're in the city, obviously we want
them to have it.
apply. That is our goal, is voluntary compliance. And like I said, you're going to find that a lot of the vendors, your adoption centers, your shelters, everybody is microchipping before they release that animal.
Thank you.
Councilmember Dollar?
I'm just going to, I guess, tailgate a little bit on Councilwoman Hayward there, that, we've had lots of dogs over the years. And as a matter of fact, a lot of our dogs have more than one microchip because we've traveled internationally and they have different standards for microchips when you go overseas. Never had any issues with that. And I know that's just anecdotal, but when we look at the ordinance, that there's a option there for tattooing in lieu of a microchip, versus the savings that the people that would see over a lifetime instead of doing the annual compliance, and the true benefit of being able to return the animals much faster and reducing the load on the services center. I think the benefits outweigh the negatives on this, and for those that do have a dog that might develop some sort of illness as a reaction to this, it is unfortunate, but and I definitely feel for somebody losing a pet like that. It's an awful thing to happen, but I think we're better off as a community by going ahead and moving forward with this.
Hey, thank you. Any others? Councilmember Larson?
I just make a motion to approve ordinance number 20H06.
Okay.
Second.
Motion's been made by Councilmember Larson, second by Councilmember Hayward. Council, any other comments? None. Let's call for the vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Nay.
Okay, we have 6 ayes, 1 objection, motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Bain. Okay, we'll move on to resolution, item number 5, resolution number 20R39, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing expenditures in the amount not to exceed $500,000 with Salisbury Ford Incorporated. Ms. Goliath? You have
Good
the
evening,
floor.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, city staff that are present. Give me just a moment to pull this up for you guys. So what we're doing tonight is requesting an additional authorization for Silsbee Ford for 5 replacement vehicles, and we just wanted to give you a little history on what we're doing here. We did purchase 1 battalion chief truck for the fire department. It was a single purchase under $50,000 with a single vendor, which aligns with our standard authorization of up to $50,000. And then we also, around the same time, purchased 9 police department Explorers. They were treated as a project purchase, very similar to how we handle engineering and construction projects. So since this project was going to exceed the $50,000, a resolution was taken to council. Approval of the expenditures, around $300,000, was approved on 19R118. And then that brings us to this evening, and we're requesting additional authorization for 5 more vehicle replacements, approximately $150,000. And this purchase is part of a larger effort to complete the 1920 vehicle replacement program. 3 of those vehicles were purchased recently from Caldwell County Ford, which you guys approved on 20R13. And then we have these 5 remaining vehicles, which are going to Silsbee, 1 for EMS, 1 for facility services, 1 for the motor pool, 1 for a meter tech, and 1 for inspections. And we are including an overall not to exceed with Silsbee on this resolution, as we anticipate this being the last purchase from Silsbee Ford for the fiscal year, as we close out this vehicle replacement program.
Okay, thank you. Council, floor is open for discussion. Councilmember Scaviola.
Yeah, I'm just reading the agenda item, and the agenda item says in excess of 50,000, and then the write-up itself is talking 500,000. So which are we approving?
It is actually up to 500,000 when you add the
500,000.
original resolution 19R118, which was for 300,000,
Got it.
and include the battalion chief vehicle. With these 5 vehicles in addition, it comes out to approximately $500,000 for the year.
Thank you. I think the caption needs to reflect that 500,000 instead of the 50,000 then. That's all I have, sir.
Thank you. Any other questions, council? Yes, $500,000 is what I mentioned, yes. Okay, council, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay, I got that from Councilmember Dalla, who,
Second.
second by Councilmember Davis. Okay, motion's been made by Councilmember Dalla, second by Councilmember Davis. Council, any other comments? None, let's call for the vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
7 ayes, no objection, motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, item number 6, resolution number 20R37, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, increasing the budget expenditures for contract for Fuquari Incorporated related to the 2018 span resurfacing project. Mr. Novak, you have the floor.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I have some pictures I'd like to kind of scroll through here. It'll take me just a minute to get them open. What we're talking about is one of our 2018 SPAM projects. This is what we're calling the resurfacing project, or our chip seal area. as that was what was awarded. We have prep work that we have to do before we apply the new surface onto the street. And that prep work kind of varies from street to street. For the most part, it's doing what we call base repair areas, where we have what we call alligator cracking. We have to repair that before we put a new surface on. You know, we also do what's called asphalt leveling, where you have ruts or dips, big dips in the pavement. We want to fill those in, kind of smooth out the surface before we put a new thin surface on top. So when we do the project design, we walked all the streets, we tried to identify all these areas and put all those quantities in the contract. With this particular project, we had difficulty bidding. And so there was a pretty significant lapse in time from the time we did the design, we actually got to construction. So the contractor went out with our plans, they marked all these areas that we had identified in our project plans, and then they called us and they said, hey, we've marked all this stuff, we've looked at all the streets, we have some questions. We have some areas here that aren't in the plans that we really think need to be repaired. And some of these areas that you said were this size are a little bit bigger than what you've got in the plans. So we went out and we took a look at them. And what I'm about to show you are just some examples of some areas where we found that some of these repair areas increased in size, or we found new areas. This is a screen capture, a clip from part of our plans in the Greenfield Village area. And it's one of the cul-de-sacs at a corner, a 90-degree corner. If you notice, the highlighted thing was actually replacement of a drive approach. We wound up not having to replace that, so there's a little bit of savings there. But if you notice, right in that cul-de-sac and right next to the cul-de-sac, there's nothing shown for base repairs. Unlike a little bit further down the street, there's an area that's got a kind of a red hatch to it that we had identified as needing a base repair. When we got out there, this is one of the areas our contractor wanted us to look at. And when we got out there, the entire cul-de-sac area, when we looked at it the first time, just had some cracking in it that we could crack seal and we could chip seal over the top of it and be fine, had deteriorated rapidly. And not just a small area in it. Unfortunately, it was the entire cul-de-sac. And then we had another area kind of in the center of the street going south from that cul-de-sac area that also needed repair. The same thing. So this is a picture of the repair work that we actually had to do at this location. This is south of the cul-de-sac looking north. And you can see in the center of the street there, there's about an 89-foot long by 10-foot wide patch that we had to do that was not in our plans. It was not there when we did the design. You can kind of see part of the cul-de-sac back. You can see new pavement there. This is looking from the east, looking west at the cul-de-sac, and you can see the new pavement across that entire cul-de-sac that we had to do. So this adds cost to the project. And normally when we do a contract award, we establish a not to exceed amount to allow us some flexibility if we encounter some unforeseen things. But this was a big one. We went from 0 square feet of repair area to 4,800 square feet of repair area being needed at this one location. We look at another one of our streets, close proximity to this. Well, this is another example of some unforeseen conditions. This is on Live Oak. This was an area that we had identified for a base repair. The top surface of the pavement had settled, alligator cracked. We knew we had a problem. It's also on top of part of where part of the utility lines run underneath the street. When they milled through this and uncovered the concrete cap that was over part of the utility infrastructure, it was discovered that the concrete cap had collapsed. There was a void underneath it. You can kind of see how it's broken up, how it's settled. And this is kind of a close-up picture of it. You can see in this area here, you can see there's an air void underneath that concrete. So what this did is, while we didn't have an increase in excavation, and it doesn't seem like much, but on a large patch area, it adds up pretty quickly. We had extra depth we had to fill up with asphalt. And so our asphalt quantity started to overrun. This is also a screen capture from our plans for Live Oak. The approach that you see right here is one of the entrances into Good Shepherd Catholic Church. You can see we had a large base repair area identified, but in this area here, we didn't have anything. We noticed when we were out there, it's like, okay, we're starting to see a little bit of wear, but we don't really have ruts yet that we have to worry about filling in. When we got to actual construction, we had ruts. And the pavement was starting to crack because of the depth of the ruts. We needed to kind of fill those in, smooth them out. We had to do this patch. It wound up being both sides of the road. This is that same approach going into the church. This is an asphalt level up, where we take a very fine grade mix and we just use it to smooth out the surface, fill in the dips, fill in the ruts in this case. So our asphalt quantity went long again. I'm going to shift gears a little bit just to show you that this isn't the only project that we encounter stuff that we don't expect. This is actually on Church Parkway, the portion that we just started. And you can see where we ended our concrete pavement from the last project. This is just right next to it. How thick do you think that asphalt is looking at that picture? If it's an inch, that's being awfully generous. And that wasn't the only spot we had that. You can see the pieces of asphalt that the contractor removed. They're all really thin. There's 1 inch to 2 inches of asphalt out there. And while that section may work fine in a residential neighborhood, on Church Parkway, it just cannot hold up to the traffic. Now, if you noticed in the first picture, I'll go back to it real quick. As they were peeling off that asphalt, you can see kind of the teeth marks in the base, the gravel base. It indicates that base is really hard. I'm going to go to, that's that base coming out in chunks because it was stabilized base. Meaning when that base was placed, somebody added Portland cement to it to stiffen it up. You start thinking about it saying, geez, that was really stout base material underneath there. Why were we still seeing failures in the surface of that street? Pavement is more than just one thing or another. Your pavement section, what carries your structural load, is everything that you have, a foundation, the subgrade, the natural material that's out there. That isn't stable or prepped properly. It's like a bad foundation under a home. Have a base layer. That needs to be a certain thickness depending upon the loading that you're going to have. Then you have the asphalt or concrete or whatever your top surface material is. All three of those things have to work together to be able to support the full traffic loading. If one of those components is too thin, your whole pavement section can fail because it cannot support the full load. And I think that's what's happened here. Now, in this case, we're reconstructing the street. So the fact that we hit this, it's not causing an increase in cost to that project. It's just an example of some of the unknown things or some of the unique things we sometimes discover when we get into some of these projects. And it kind of helps explain why we have some of the failures that we were seeing in the surface. Is we had a good layer of base. The subgrade was probably prepped pretty well. There just wasn't enough asphalt on there to handle the load on the street. Now, that section, if you had that same section in a residential neighborhood, you'd probably never see a failure in it. But on Church Parkway, with all the cars and trucks that takes on a daily basis, that is just not enough to carry that load. So that's it for my pictures. But what the end result of this is, we've gone over on our resurfacing contract. So we had a choice. We can not do the repairs. If we didn't do those repairs, those additional repairs, we take a chance and we put the new chip seal on, that in those areas that new surface is going to fail much more quickly than it should. The right thing to do is to do the repairs. We say, okay, we've got a fixed budget allocated for this project, so if we went over on this, we need to scale back some other part of the project to stay within budget. And so that's what we're prepared to do on the one hand. But on the other hand, we remember the direction that the council gave us with respect to this whole project list, the 2018, not just this portion of the project, but also the other two phases, the reconstruction effort and the rehabilitation effort. The council expressed a desire, they said, get this done. And so that's why we're coming back to you this evening asking for additional funding, is to cover that additional cost and to be able to do the entire new surface throughout the entire project area. Now, when we put this together, what we're requesting is, say, okay, we've done almost all the prep work at the time we put all this together. All that's left is waiting for the right weather to be able to put the chip seal on. Now, there's a possibility there could be a little bit of discrepancy in the quantities, the final quantities. There sometimes usually is. We try to get them as close as possible when we bid, but we often round up. And sometimes, things just don't match up exactly. So we could have said, this is all we need to be able to cover just this overage. But the project isn't done. And we didn't want to say, have to come back to you and say, we found something else out, or something else happened as we're finishing this project and we need more money. So what we're asking you to do is authorize increasing the not to exceed amount to the maximum amount for this contract by state law, which would be 25% over what the bid amount was. So that's what's reflected in the resolution, is going up to that maximum cap. So we would not have to come back to you for additional approval or request additional funding if something else was encountered on this project. Now, I don't anticipate that we'll have to use all that funding. So whatever we don't use would then be available for use on another SPAN project. But just so you have a clear picture, by doing this, this is, if worst case scenario we had to use that full amount, this is the implication that it has with our 5-year CIP that we talked about last month. And what's going on here? How come it's not highlighted? Apologize, I clicked on the wrong file. Okay, this is the 2020 project list that was part of our 5-year CIP. We had everything on there, and we had a total of dollar amounts. What we're asking for in terms of additional funding is about $103,000 allocated to the 2018 project. So I had to look at this list and say, okay, if we used all that money, what do I have to take off that list? This is one here is close to that dollar amount. So we'd have to pull that from 2020 and move it down in the 5-year CIP to do it another year. And so that's what this represents, is highlighting this, would be removing that, and that would be the new total for 2020. That's the worst case scenario if we had to use that full amount. I'm hopeful, jinx myself, but I'm hopeful we're not, number one, we're not going to have to use that full amount. I'm hopeful we're not going to have to use the full amount in the not to exceed amounts on the other two contracts, so that at the end of the day, we may not have to delete that one. Maybe it's a smaller one we have to delete. This is a worst case scenario, but it does have implications to our 5-year CIP because of this overrun, unfortunately. I also want to share with you that we're trying to do things a little bit differently. You know, the 2018 effort was kind of our first comprehensive effort as a city. We're trying to learn from that process. One of the things that surprised us with this project was the lag time we had in getting bids and actually getting to construction. The other thing that was very shocking was just how fast that extra deterioration occurred. It surprised me. It surprised a lot of people. Which is one reason why we're diligently working right now to shorten that window. So with our 2020 list, we want to get that designed, get it out to bid, and roll right into construction as quickly as possible so we don't run that risk of having that additional, or we have less of a risk of having additional deterioration occur between that. And we're hopeful now that we've got a contractor who seems genuinely interested in working again for the city of Schertz, that they'll chase after the next round of projects. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Council, floor is open for discussion. Councilmember Davis.
Slide the spreadsheet back up. So we're saying that we may have to slip the Country Club Estates ship seal 2021. On the spreadsheet, we also have Schertz Forest for 110 and Val Verde for 110. Have we looked at the impact of potentially slipping either one of those? I mean, did we come to a decision based on the PCI index? Or what drove Northcliffe Country Club Estates for 110 versus the other two?
John can talk through kind of why he picked this one. I think really what we wanted to do with this graphic, though, when he and I talked about it, is what we don't want to do is bring a decision to you and not fully explain, hey, here's the implication of this. And so for us, it was critical to say, hey, look, let's just walk through the potential impact of this. And so John will talk about why he picked this one as opposed to another. But a couple things are at play with it. One is, as you know, right now our policy is to take any excess reserves and put them to these. And so a couple things could happen. As John said, we may not use all this money on all our projects and we may be just fine. Just didn't want to assume that. Second is we may have a bit more roll-in from excess reserves and we're perfectly fine with it. The other thing we started doing is really trying to look at the timing of some of our utility projects, water, sewer, things like that. And that may affect it. And so we may come back and say, yeah, it's kind of moot. We've got to move this project down because of some other issue. So what I think we wanted to be clear is this wasn't necessarily the final, here's how we're amending the CIP. We haven't had you do that. It was really an exercise to say, we just want you to understand the implication of the decision. But likely what we'll do is come back to you in a few months and say, all right, we just want to re-bless the CIP. Here's how those plays out. And you can tell us if this is the one you want to do or it's a different one you want to do. But I'll let John talk about why he picked that one in particular as opposed to another.
One of the biggest reasons why I picked that one was I drove those streets and looked at them with a fairly careful eye. And yes, there are some base repair areas that need to be done. But if we could work with Public Works and get those streets crack sealed rather quickly, they could survive another year or two and not rapidly deteriorate. And so that was one of the reasons why I picked them. We have a little bit more issues like in Schertz Forest, for example. There's a little bit more deterioration on those streets. There's some drainage issues that kind of, with some leveling, need to be resolved, that they may deteriorate more rapidly than those would if we can just get in and crack them.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Scott.
And also Val Verde, like the Schertz Forest, might have had drainage. I was thinking the exact same thing, by the way, Councilman Davis. Val Verde, does that also have drainage issues?
It might have some localized ones. We haven't got into the design yet. That's an effort we're just getting started on here later this month to really take a hard look at those. All of these on the list, actually.
Thank you. And then one more, because I don't have a background in what yours is. Whenever you said the pavement was like 1, maybe 2 inches, I mean the concrete, how thick is the one whenever you're doing it? What's the end result? How thick is that?
The new surface that we're putting on, I'm going to kind of digress a little bit. You have different tools in your toolbox depending upon what condition your street is. And what we're talking about here when we're talking about a resurfacing type project is what us engineering geek speak refer to as pavement preservation, where you have a street that is basically sound. You might have some localized failures here and there, but overall it's in reasonably good condition. And so we're trying to put, I don't want to say minimal, but a smaller investment in that to correct these minor defects and put a new wearing surface on top of it to extend the life of that street. And we've, over time, over the long term, if you make that investment at regular intervals and keep resetting that PCI score, that condition up, then over time, like over a 40-year life cycle, you're actually saving money than if you do nothing to the street and let it completely fall apart and have to rebuild it. And so when we talk about the resurfacing project, we're in the pavement preservation. So the new surface that we're putting on the street is really pretty thin. The chip seal involves shooting a layer of oil down, and then we drop a layer of rock into it. And that oil has additives in it that seal up the oxidized pavement that's out there now and kind of helps rejuvenate it a little bit to a limited extent. But the big thing is that it gives you a new driving surface to drive on, and that lasts 8 to 10 years. And then the concept is you would go back and you do that again. So the underlying pavement structure has to be sound for this type of treatment to work. Now conversely, if we look at like Schertz Parkway, Tri-County Parkway, yes, we could go in there and put a thin layer of asphalt on top of that, or we could go in and do a chip seal. The problem is the underlying structure isn't holding up to the traffic to begin with. Mm-hmm. And so we could put that on there, and what should last 8 to 10 years, you may be lucky if it lasts a year in some cases. It may last 2 years. And so you're going to have to keep going back and doing that over. So you're losing that cost savings then. And so you're in a different category of effort where you're into a reconstruction effort. And then you have a category that's kind of in between where you need a little bit more strength, but you don't necessarily have to dig everything out and go with a much thicker section. If you kind of treat or reuse what you've got there and add more structural capacity to it, you can get to a street that then goes into the preservation category, where then you're just looking at a thin surface.
Okay, I'll ask one more question and then I'll get off of it. Was the Schertz Parkway, was it just, I don't know how long ago it was done. It seems like it wasn't that long ago, but time goes faster the older you get. Was it not done correctly back when was the last time it was done? And then was it done correctly at that point?
That is difficult for me to say. And I know some of you are going to say, oh, he's hedging his bets. And it's like, well, I don't like attacking another engineer's work unless I have a clear understanding of what his parameters were at the time. It's easy for me to look at it right now and say, that section's not strong enough for the traffic that's out there. But when that project was done, and it was done 20 years ago, 20 years ago, were they anticipating this much traffic being on the street? If they weren't, and they used a different design parameter, then what they designed to may have been adequate at the time. But with all the development we've had, the growth the community has had, it's just not enough for what's out there now. And sometimes that happens. Yes. I'd have to look it up, but it was at least 4 inches thick. And it had a much thicker base section underneath it.
Thank you. Councilmember Scaraglia?
Yeah, John, you're doing good work. Thank you so very much. Hey, yeah, okay, I think you may highlight in Northcliffe just to get a rise out of me, but anyway. we won't go there, okay? Because quite frankly, I do tend to agree with you in this situation. But the thing is, how much of a contingency do we usually roll into our the contracts?
About 10%.
10%. Does that need to be adjusted in the future?
On some projects, possibly. On other projects, maybe not so much.
Yeah.
In my experience, I've been able to live within 10% on 90% of my jobs. But there's been 10% out there where they've taken more. And just the luck I had with this one, this is one of the ones that's in that 10%.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with timing also. As we go forward, these projects aren't getting cheaper. And as they get delayed, you can expect that they're going to be a little bit more expensive. I see a difference between the 2020 and the 2021. In 2021, we're projecting $2 million versus the $3.5 million for 2020. Simple solution. I really don't think all these projects are going to get accomplished in 2020. I mean, as it is, we're using money from 2017, 2018, and whatnot. Wouldn't it be a simple enough matter just to roll it, any projects that aren't accomplished, into the 2021 timeframe?
Yes, it could. When we put this list together, the 2020 list represents what we figured we had left in the bond money available, plus what we were told we had available for excess general fund reserves.
Mm-hmm.
That's why that dollar amount is the way it is and why it's more than $2 million. When we looked at the other years, we didn't have that data. We assumed we don't have any bond money. What's a reasonable assumption that we could make for an annual dollar amount to shoot for? And we picked $2 million. And so that's how we set up that CIP. Now, if we have more than $2 million in excess general fund reserves for the 2021 project list, then some items that are in the 2022 list could then move up. If we have less general fund reserves, then it's going to have to slide down. But that's how we put the program together, so we had a starting point, a good starting point that we could work from.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there really is a problem here, because generally speaking, we're going to roll these things into the next year anyway. And it's been my experience on the council that if there's a need, you can find the funding. And generally speaking, our reserves have been underestimated for the past couple of years. Sir.
We'll say a couple things with regard to John said, other is trying to appeal to housing. Because that affects some of the appeal. Likely they're going to go to the right. Right. As long as council is good with that and gives us feedback, we'll keep operating that way. Because being overly cautious.
Yeah, I teach a class on analysis of constraints, and quite frankly, I kind of admire the approach you take to most of this, and I think it's good that you're expediting a lot of these projects. Just wondering, why one particular project it didn't simply get slipped into the next year. But you're doing a wonderful work. Thank you so very much. That's all I have, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Council, any other comments? Councilmember Dalla?
Just that, I kind of support your statement there, Mr. James. I like the idea, fix it once, fix it right.
Any other comments? Councilmember Brown?
Real quick, just a little historical perspective. Back in the last Great Depression, we put a lot of things off in the city and rearranged the budget. And that affects us to today because we didn't have a pavement control or a pavement condition indicator program until probably 14, 15 again. So we spent about 5 years out there just kind of patching around, with city workers and stuff. So, we're finally getting to a place where we can get, I'm not going to say ahead of the game. You're never going to get ahead of the game on roads, but we're moving forward, and I appreciate the planning and the thoughtfulness you all have put into it.
Okay, any other comments?
Mayor, I make a motion, we approve Resolution 20R37.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made by Councilmember Dalla, second by Councilmember Davis. Am I correct on that one? Okay. Council, any other comments? Let's call for the vote.
Aye.
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 Okay, we have 7 ayes, no objection, motion passes. We'll move on to the roll call confirmation. Our City Secretary, Brenda Dennis, will provide roll call vote confirmation for consent agenda items 1, 3, and 4, and discussion items 2, 5, and 6. Ms. Dennis?
Yes, Mayor. Consent agenda items 1, 3, and 4. Motion was made by Mayor Pro Tem Davis, seconded by Councilmember Scott. Mayor Pro Tem Davis, Councilmember Scott, Larson, Dalla, Scagliola, Hayward, and Brown voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed. Item number 2, ordinance number 20H06 on final reading. Motion was made by Councilmember Larson, seconded by Councilmember Hayward. Mayor Pro Tem Davis, Councilmembers Larson, Dalla, Scott, Hayward, Brown voted yes. Councilmember Scott voted no. Motion passed. Item number 5, resolution number 20R39. Motion was made by Councilmember Dalla, seconded by Councilmember Davis. Mayor Pro Tem Davis, Councilmember Scott, Larson, Dalla, Scagliola, Hayward, Brown voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed. Item number 6, resolution number 20R37. A motion was made by Councilmember Dalla, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Davis. Mayor Pro Tem Davis, Councilmember Scott, Larson, Dalla, Scagliola, Hayward, and Brown voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed.
Thank you, Ms. Dennis. All right, we'll move on to a workshop. Item number 7, emergency operations update regarding our current COVID-19 cases. Chief Long, you have the floor.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. All right, thanks. I just kind of wanted to start out and go back through the timeline a little bit of kind of where we started and kind of what it looked like in our area. So we started with March 13th is when the governor declared this state of disaster. And then on March 20th is when our mayor declared a state of disaster. March 20th also is when we stood up a partial activation of the EOC, and so it's pretty much been a partial activation ever since then, running essentially 7 to 5 each day. March 22nd is when Schertz reported its first COVID case, and then March 31st is when the governor's executive order was issued that essentially placed the stay-at-home order and essential services in place. And then I just kind of listed here with our other counties on April 3rd, Guadalupe, Comel extended the disaster. Bear updated and added a few additional things on April 6th. Most of those are running through the end of the month. Some national ones we talked about too was on March 13th, President Trump did the disaster declaration. March 25th, an important one for us, was President Trump approved a major disaster declaration for the state of Texas, and that really opens up the funding stream for local agencies across the state with that approval. Also on April 8th, just ending there, is when we come back to council after the governor's order to provide an update for that. And I mentioned too something you'll see that's a little bit different on March 19th. The Department of State Health Services issued a public health disaster declaration as well, and those are basically working in unison with each other, but it's two different codes that allows kind of two different things that can occur, or actions can be taken. Next, I just tried to kind of go back through and listed it kind of from the beginning to now to kind of show the cities kind of around us here: Schertz, Cibolo, Seguin, and Selma. Selma's pretty much stayed the same. Once they got some cases, they pretty much stayed the same. Cibolo shot up there to the top, and they've kind of topped out there at 18 is where that number is. I can tell you as of tonight, we just got word right before the meeting that Guadalupe County had one additional case today, and that case is located in Schertz. So that will add one more for our report in the morning. But either way, you can see, as we talked about earlier in previous meetings about flattening the curve, you can see here just from our city data that we've got a pretty good line going across there. So even when Cibolo got up to 18, it kind of kept gradually going over that way as opposed to jumping up and staying up there. So I would say from this standpoint, you know, the cities have done a pretty good job of keeping the curve flat. Going on to the next one, just kind of a representation of comparing the total COVID cases per 1,000 people of population. And so this was just to kind of take some of our larger counties that we're seeing the biggest spikes in around the state and looking at that. And so you can see Guadalupe there is in the red line there is just kind of been steady across the board throughout the, since March 22nd. It's just kind of been steady across the data is showing there. And you can see compared to Travis County and Austin and Bexar County, still not, just real big spikes. All of them have kind of been steady across the chart there as you go across. Next one is looking at the total cases by county, and it looks like it cut the edge off there, but Harris County's leading the state right now, and that number was around 3,700. Right now is where that one tops out at. But if you looked at the data the past few days, it's been a much smaller increase each day, so that's been, good to see. We've seen some drops down to 4%, 5% on some of the COVID case increases, so that's been welcome to see across the board. The death as well is not, continuing to jump up there to a high percentage. And so just from looking at the total cases of the county, whenever you look at some of the others in New York, you really see some of those bigger spikes in the middle of that data set. And so this is showing that it's just kind of been a steady pace, but it hasn't outpaced our medical capabilities at this point. So, that was really the whole goal of talking about flattening the curve and trying to spread those out over a longer period of time so that we had plenty of hospital space, ventilators, things like that. And so even the latest model shows that we still have, several hundred ventilators available in the area versus how many people are on those right now. I believe the last number I seen was in the 40s that are on ventilators currently in the San Antonio metro area at this point. So that's kind of what this is showing here, that we've kind of just kept it steady across several weeks as opposed to getting those big spikes. So I just kind of wanted to talk next here on what's next. We're getting at that point where we're seeing the numbers drop, and so I just wanted to mention here, the next for the emergency management side and city management side is to start discussing, moving from the response that we're doing now to the recovery and what that looks like. And I don't have all the answers to those tonight. It's just to say this is what's next for emergency management discussion here with the leadership, and so we can start looking at, the goal would be developing some type of sustained approach to reopening instead of just, saying everything's open on Friday at 5 and, let's hope for the best. And so that's kind of what we mean when we talk about moving from response to recovery, is what is next and what's it look like. And so that, that requires a lot of discussion to where we kind of got to look at events that are planned, what size they are, things like that, so that we can start kind of making those decisions on what that looks like moving forward and what that approach looks like. And, is it over a 2-week period or a 3-week period or something like that? I think, the governor has put out information that later this week he's going to address a lot of these with us, that we're going to be able to come back and talk about at a later date, but he's made it clear that he's going to address some school situations later this week, as well as it's his goal to talk about taking a sustained approach to reopening to where, I think the only hint he's give so far is to talk about it's going to be businesses that pose the least amount of risk for spreading COVID is really the only hint that he's kind of put out so far. So we're just waiting on that press conference and see what comes out of that as we move forward in this process and move into the recovery phase of this event. That's kind of the quick update I've got. Is there any questions that I can?
Thank you, Chief. Council, floor is open for discussion. Councilmember Scott.
Whenever y'all are going to brainstorm for ways to reopen, can you share, do you know what that's going to look like? Are you going to, follow the president's lead and talk to people in transportation or manufacturing? Or Schertz has a very diverse business base without committing yourselves or revealing things maybe you don't want to yet. Can you just talk to what that might look like a little bit?
I think for the most part, what we've tried to do is get input from different areas. That's one thing that, you know, we don't always know what we don't know. And so during this process of essential and non-essential, you know, we've had a lot of discussions with a lot of community members and trying to get those questions answered and try to spend time, you know, allowing that input to come from different ones as well. I know we've talked to the chamber as well a lot and got input from the chamber, and, you know, so I think that's our main approach going forward when we get to that point of that discussion, is getting input from as many areas as we can.
Just one more, and that is, I don't know if we're talking globally, and I'm going to start going into the minutia or the little details of it. But like for city employees, whenever Dr. Brown and his team decides, and Mayor decides it's appropriate that we start, you know, coming back to work and come off the staggered shifts and what have you, what about face masks? Is the city going to have enough for its own employees, or how is that? Is that even an appropriate question to ask right now, or what?
Well, I think at this point it would be hard to answer that as far as, because when you look at the CDC guidelines, you get into the discussion of, are you talking about N95s, or are you just talking about a fabric covered face mask? You know, probably at this point, if it was the direction to look at N95 masks, then no, you know, we probably would not have enough of those. But if it was just kind of looking at the CDC guidelines and going with some type of face mask cover that lots of citizens are making these days and stuff, then I don't think that would be an issue.
So, you know, so to your first question about getting input, you know, Chief can correct me if he thinks I'm wrong, but I think what's likely to happen is that the governor is going to issue instructions. I think they're going to be fairly specific, governor and the county, so they're going to sort of start rolling off of these things, but I think they're going to give us pretty specific guidance on what is to open and what is not to open. In other words, I don't see a scenario where they're just going to say, okay, mayors and county judges, up to you, you do whatever you think. That's kind of how I see it, and I don't know if you want to comment on that, Mayor.
Oh, definitely, yeah, just a quick comment. Yeah, when the governor, he probably will issue some guidance, and, you know, of course, we're still also under the county guidance, so the county will have to modify theirs so that we can look and see exactly how we're going to approach it. And there's several different ways. That's why it's very difficult to speculate exactly how we're going to handle it until the governor actually has taken some action, and then the county judge. So, but as soon as they do, our team is ready to start the process and start opening things up. Okay. Council, any other questions? Councilmember Dalla.
I know this has come up a number of times nationally with PPE, and just wondering how your teams are set up, and are you guys okay with it? Do you have enough, and if not, what is it that you need?
Yeah, I would say right now, you know, we had another donation today from a business in the community that's really helped out, but for fire and EMS and even PD, right now we're sitting pretty good. You know, we've got our request in on our list in to all the regional emergency managements and through the state, and so we've been getting some of those requests filled every few weeks as PPEs become available. We've been on that list, and we've got a fair share each time some of that's become available from the state. Through the STAR request and the State Operations Center putting out those supplies. So, you know, I would say right now, you know, we've probably got at least a month of supplies on hand.
All right, and I guess this is more for staff. You know, I mentioned this when we had our first meeting on this topic, that when we get to where we're starting to reopen, you know, I don't know if we can or if we're able to, but we know that some of these businesses are not going to reopen. Some of them may be on the edge, and if there's some way we can look at options to possibly help them through EDC, I certainly would like to explore that conversation. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. You know, who knows what it would look like. But I think long term, it would be less expensive for us to help save a local business than to try to attract another one. And I think it's a conversation worth having. Thank you.
Okay, Council, any other questions? No other questions? This is only a workshop, so there is no motions to be made on this one. Thank you, Chief Long.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, we'll continue with announcements by your city manager, Dr. Brown. Okay. We have requests by Mayor and Council for future items to be placed on the agenda. Is there any? None? Okay.
Mayor.
Yes, Councilmember Scott.
I don't know if it's a future agenda item, but I really, really like what Councilmember Dalla just now said. I thought that's sublime. That's fantastic. And I would like to see more discussion in that area.
Well, certainly, our testing will look into that this week and see exactly what we can work out. Appreciate it. Okay, announcements by council members. Councilmember Davis, Mayor Pro Tem Davis.
Nothing, sir.
Councilmember Scott.
No.
Councilmember Larson.
Nothing.
Councilmember Dalla.
Nothing, sir.
Councilmember Scagliola.
Nada.
Councilmember Hayward. Councilmember Brown.
Ditto.
And I have no further announcements. The time is now 7:14. We stand adjourned.